Martin Walsh, how are you? Welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Hey, how you doing, Gareth? Thanks a million for having me. Looking forward to it.
No problem. We might have to get some subtitles if this Irish accents come out very strong.
Yes, hopefully mine is a bit softer after 22 years over here in the US, so
Very
it
good.
might be
Yeah,
a little softer than the Donegal one.
22 years. I tell you, whenever we were, for the audience, we were talking offline just briefly about a few things, and I could hear it coming creeping back. I would never have thought 22 years now.
Yeah, no, it doesn't be long going. It
Very
goes
good.
quick.
Well, listen, I've been trying to get you on for a while. Delighted to have you. I just want to kind of go all the way back to your time in Ireland. Obviously, you studied in Galway. Take us back. Why Galway? I know you're a Mayo man by heart. Why Galway? And also, why construction? Is it a generational thing within your family?
Sure. So I think, starting out why construction, I kind of grew up on a farm in the west of Ireland in Culturema, and basically, went to secondary school and showed an aptitude towards the construction side of things basically went to a technical school in Culturema for 4 years. And then, the principal there recognized an aptitude to go into engineering, which I didn't even know what an engineer was, back in secondary school. But then did some research, and really, like things were done back then, you kind of took a leap of faith because, none of my parents were engineers or, college educated. So it was a bit of a leap of faith, trusting what the teachers and career guidance counselors were telling you. But I did have an aptitude for technical drawing, metalwork, woodwork, construction studies, mathematics, physics, all that type of subject matter. So it, basically did the same as all other people did back then, and applied to the CAO, and got lucky and got into what's today known as NUIG, back then UCG, which I personally preferred that name better. But anyways, so I think ended up going in there, and even when I was in there, the interesting thing back then, the way that the college degrees were taught, there wasn't a lot of practical experience. So I ended up, which will lead into how I ended up in the US. I ended up going to the US in my summers at college to work, and ended up working on construction sites and really enjoyed that. And so still didn't fully understand, what engineering was at first, as far as how it fit into the grand scheme of the ecosystem. But then by the time I left Galway, I had a good handle on it, and ended up, working there in Galway right out of college for a little bit. And then, after about 6 or 8 months working there, got moved over to London and worked there on what really was a foundational project for my career, really, because it was a historical renovation in a meat market not far from the Old Bailey there in London, in the historical area. And just the level of detail and the level of attention to safety, attention to planning that really was needed because of a proximity to an underground train tunnel, and all the entities involved in getting that job done was really transformational, and taught me a lot, probably just more than I even learned in college. Obviously in college you learned the problem solving skills, all the engineering side of things, but when it came to how to apply that in the real world, that project in London really was a foundational job that I think sticks with me to this day.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, what an experience as well. Obviously, anybody that doesn't know, NUIG, or the Galway University, was one of the leading universities in Ireland. And then obviously moving to London, was it always an idea of construction that would allow you to travel? I mean, it sounds as if you had an appetite for traveling, even to do the summer interns in the US.
Well, my parents had lived in Philadelphia for 8 to 10 years, around the time I was born through when I was 4 years old. So my two brothers were born in Philadelphia. And so we moved back to Ireland when it was time for me to go to school. So we had a lot of ties with the US as a family. A lot of friends would come every summer from the US. My aunt lived there for, my whole life pretty much. And so, it was a pretty natural sort of progression to go there. And again, we're talking back in pre-Celtic Tiger times when a lot of people with college degrees left Ireland. I mean, it was the brain drain, right, of the 80s and 90s. And, so it wasn't unusual. And when we traveled, we had to travel to work and make money. It wasn't like today where a lot of the younger folks in Ireland are very fortunate that they can actually travel to enjoy themselves, which is a big difference in time in a short period of time, really. So to me, I enjoyed the lifestyle in the US those summers I was here. I enjoyed the opportunities that I thought were here. And so I wanted to take a crack at it, And so, ultimately, met my now wife, and, we ended up moving to California together, and basically, started from scratch there because, moved to Sacramento area, which is where her brother happened to live at the time. But I had no contacts whatsoever. So that was a rude awakening for a youngster from Ireland who'd really only ever been around Irish culture and Irish people, even when I was abroad. And so that really jump-started me into having to grow up, is the best way I can put it to you. And literally back then, the email hadn't really taken off even at that point. So you were faxing in resumes, you were, making phone calls, trying to get someone to pick the phone up. And, back then, nobody even, they'd see, University College Galway on the resume, and they're like, what the hell is this, and so they wouldn't even call you back. So there was a lot.
You were just hoping that there was an Irish guy in the office or in the company.
That's right.
Bounce an idea.
But the biggest thing is it taught me, really the need to really have a single-mindedness to what you're doing and a belief in yourself, because it's very easy to get discouraged. And there's times where I probably did get discouraged, and, you can't get down on yourself. You have to keep going. And, ultimately I got a break and got working for a company called Clark Pacific out there. They're basically a vertically integrated precast manufacturing and installation engineering company. And for me, that was the perfect mix, because it was technical engineering. It was technical planning, a lot of drafting, a lot of, making sure things fit together properly. It wasn't just drawing to draw. I mean, stuff had to fit together. And then we were overhauling a lot of processes at the time, because high rises were just starting to get built again in California post the two big earthquakes, the Northridge earthquake in LA and, the Bay Area one of '89. And so basically in the cities are trying to figure out how to build high rises again. Precast was the primary exterior envelope that went on these buildings. So I got to work on 40-story buildings back in, the late 90s. It was just a great experience, So it just, again, taught me a lot about process, a lot about attention to detail, all the things that are really foundational in my mind to being successful in this business.
But also, Martin, I mean, if you think of your experience in London, the historical renovation, unbelievable insight into the detail of interiors, and also renovations. But then you go and are able to put on your resume a 40-story high-rise in California. I mean, a great insight into the different types of delivery, different types of project. Was that, did there come a kind of a time when you said, you know what, I prefer this type of ground-up high-rise, or were you more of an interiors guy?
I think I liked all of it. I think, to me, it's the process that I like. It's the challenge of figuring out how to make things more efficient, how to make sure things are buttoned up and executed at a high level is really what resonates with me, more than the actual product type. And one thing I've learned is it's important to get a diverse product type on your resume, because you never know what's going to happen in the economy and which markets are going to be hot. And, so I've been fortunate. I've gotten to work in, hotels, office, schools, data centers, even a little bit of microchip work and test floors and central plants. So, now car dealerships. So I think the process is what will get you through if you have an approach that's consistent, and that's a problem-solving, approach and a positive approach into getting things done. Because at the end of the day, the construction business is a get-it-done business. And, you need to be able to have a lot of relationships and all that to get things done. And, that's what it comes down to. So I think the one thing I think the education system in Ireland really helped with, is, the way it was taught, and I think still is for the most part, even in the secondary schools and the colleges, really gives a young person a top-notch education that can stand up with anybody in the world. I mean, some of the stuff and some of the engineers and architects I've had the opportunity to sit down with and develop projects, it's truly world-class folks. And, at the end of the day, the education system in Ireland really was a huge part of giving me those opportunities. Now you have to go yourself and build upon that, but if you didn't have that education behind you and that ability to solve problems, you wouldn't be able to go do what I'm fortunate enough to do every day right now.
And I totally agree with you, Martin. I mean, you've worked in London. I worked in Australia in the construction market, in New York now in the construction market, before my recruitment days. But I think the education system, we don't appreciate and understand how good it is until we travel a little bit. But also, you kind of package that up with our personality, our networking ability, our ability to socialize and network and get into a commonality with other construction workers. Irish people tend to do very well. The one thing that holds them back, and I don't know if you would agree with me, is we're not as confident a bunch as the rest of the world.
I think for the most part, I think it falls into two buckets there. I think it's either people have the, I don't know if it's not the confidence piece, but I think it's just that outward brashness that sometimes, especially you need here in the United States to kind of sometimes get through, right? But I think, I think the other part that sometimes it could come across as a lack of confidence that even myself had when I first started out is the education system in Ireland teaches us to be competitive, right? We have to, get, the points. We're competing. You're competing through college, all these things. But the one thing it doesn't give you, and it's probably the biggest lesson I had to learn, and in fact, I'm still learning it to this day, is the importance of interpersonal relationships in the business. It's not always about being right and wrong and making somebody else look bad because they didn't know what size rebar to put in a column or whatever. It's, okay, how do you solve the problem in the most proactive way that you don't basically torpedo the whole team? Is probably one thing that we didn't get in the way that we were educated, because again, we've been taught to fight, we've been taught to scratch, claw, get through, get it done type of thing, which are all attributes you need to have, but you need to be able to overlay that with the interpersonal side. And that's something, I've been fortunate that I've had some great mentors that have taken an edge off me that, was very, very rough when I first came here, just not refined, you couldn't put me in a room with an engineer or an architect when I first started out here, because, it would just be, not productive. Let's call it not.
Yeah, so I just want to quickly, Martin, jump back to when you first arrived in California. Speaking from experience, when you relocate to a new area or a new country, it's really difficult to get the right position right away because obviously your network isn't as big as it should be. So jumping at the first job that becomes available that's offering decent money, how did you navigate that situation?
Yeah, well, some of that was forced on me. So I guess, just because of not having connections, right? So I think it was kind of a fortunate outcome. But because I thought I wanted to go into, kind of what I've been doing in Ireland and in London. And it turns out that basically waiting the 6 months, and basically I did have to take a job to get by, right? So, you have to remember back at that time, it's not like you're flush with cash, so you have to live. And so there was times where I went through a range of emotions because, you are going through a change of country. So there's homesickness, there's all those sorts of things, they're just going on that affect your mindset. But I did take a temporary job with an environmental engineering company through a temp agency, and went in and hated every minute of it. I mean, I couldn't stand the job. But at the same time, you got to do what you got to do, right, at a certain point in time. Yeah. So, again, it goes back to the degree I got, I was qualified to go in and do these environmental reports. It was back in the time when all of the gas stations here in the United States were getting rid of underground storage tanks and do the remediation. And so it was a bunch of testing, analyzing, soil reports and, contaminants and all that stuff. So it was interesting, just wasn't for me. And so, but again, it just taught me, at the end of the day, looking back on, I didn't maybe realize it fully at the time, but it did teach me patience and the importance of sticking with something and staying the course, staying confident in yourself. Because there was definitely times where I was trying to find work and couldn't get a bite. That definitely the confidence took a whack. But then when I got the job that I got with Clark Pacific, again, if you don't know them, look them up. They just did the Apple headquarters most recently out there, all the structural work on it. They've grown from a great, it was much smaller when I was there than they are today, but they're a great family-run business and a great family. And, they really took me under the wings and took care of me and really taught me a lot, both technically and personally. That really changed the trajectory of my whole career, basically, in my life, so to speak, because really they were patient with me when a lot of other people might have fired me just with some of the rough edges, that, coming from Ireland and how construction sites work in Ireland versus to how they work here, and meetings work in Ireland with contractors and architects versus here. It's a different world on how the conversations go and how the interactions go. And, very, very fortunate that, Bob Clark, really took me under his wing and really gave me great opportunities. And, I progressed up from a project engineer when I went in there. And literally the day I went in there, my project manager, that was my boss at the time, brought a set of plans in, put them on my desk and said, "You're going to LA for 6 months in 2 weeks. So get ready." So I'm like, okay. And so, ended up doing the Dole World headquarters in Westlake Village down just north of Los Angeles, And so that just was a whole new world of just traveling and just, seeing all these different job sites. And so I was fortunate, I got to work on jobs in Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles, downtown San Francisco. I mean, just things that, even at the time, I probably didn't fully appreciate, being honest. Just what opportunities they were. But looking back, I mean, they were just tremendous foundational projects for my whole, a great foundation for my career,
But it just shows you, Bob, your project managers, they obviously saw something in those 2 or 3 weeks to say that, listen, Martin can handle this. I'm sure they don't do that with everyone. I mean, that's literally into the job, into the deep end. You're going to learn, you're going to sink or swim. But obviously you progress. And I was going to ask you about that because going in as project engineer, 2.5 years later as senior project manager. I mean, give us an idea of the types, levels, sizes of projects you were running as senior PM.
Yeah, I mean, some of it was, just opportunity, right? It happened to be timing, right? The economy was good. The dot-com boom was there. So it was just work was flowing in the door. So some of it was out of necessity, right? That they had to, anyone that was showing any sort of positive energy and positive impact on their business, they were going to give you the opportunity, right? And they're an engineering-based company, so which is a lot different than a lot of contractors here in the U.S. Park Pacific is an engineering-based company, and engineers at all levels of that company is their mindset, right? So it's a very precision planning type of company, which suited me. From production all the way to execution in the field. So I think they, I progressed up, ended up doing as a project manager, I ended up working in partnership with another project manager on a very, very complicated federal courthouse in Bakersfield, California. And that we probably spent a year on that. It was so complicated. You're dealing with bomb blast requirement. I mean, it was just a very, very tough job. And it was a tough job for the company. And so, myself and the other PM worked under a project executive, and it was challenging at times for all of us. But, I think that job showed Bob Clark that, myself and the other PM had what it took to be senior leaders in this company as he was growing this company rapidly. And so from that project scale-wise, I mean, precast-wise, I don't remember now, but I bet you that was every bit of a $200-300 million courthouse. I mean, it was a big job.
Wow.
From a general contractor perspective, yeah. Then
Brilliant.
you've got, then I ended up, as a senior PM working on the St. Regis Hotel downtown San Francisco. It was a 42-story building. We ended up what Clark Pacific do routinely today, but we did the first job we'd ever done where we'd actually put the glass into the precast panels at a glass factory and shipped everything into the site pre-glazed. So we
Wow.
had to figure all that out.
How many windows were broken on the way?
We didn't break a window, if you believe it. It was unbelievable. We planned it that well, and we didn't have to touch. It's a pretty complicated job, and got to work with Leo Chow from SOM. He's a world-renowned architect, and just developing that job. And so just very lucky again, on how we were able to do these things. So yeah, then I worked on residential project in Wilshire Boulevard. I worked, it's another 28-story, 25-story building, something like that. So just some good sized projects. Worked on a Caltrans headquarters down in San Diego, which is another just great. At the time, LEED was just becoming good, so that was a very sustainable project. So there's just a lot of cool different types, shapes, and sizes of projects, all their own challenges, but it was fun because you had to integrate precision building planning with precision construction operational planning, from cranes to trucks getting in, logistics plans, all those sorts of things. So it all worked for where my passions lie.
Good. And then that's your career up until then seemed to be very focused on the operations things. Listen, we know that pre-construction, schedule and logistics, procurement. When you moved into a project executive role with Howard Wright, is that where was that your first kind of insight into pre-construction? Give us an idea of how that role.
Yeah, I probably started at the end of Clark Pacific doing more of that, because as a CPM, you had to support the estimating department in developing a strategy for a conceptual building. And so that's kind of where I started, but really getting into the pre-construction and getting into estimating specific was at Howard S. Wright. And I was very fortunate again, at the time at Howard S. Wright, the company was working on breaking down barriers between offices. And, I was lucky that, our COO at the time, Del Pello, had brought his senior pre-con guy, Bill Jensen, down from Oregon. And again, Bill and I just clicked. And so Bill really taught me a lot and helped me build a good foundation in pre-construction. I wouldn't say I'm an estimator by any stretch of the imagination officially, but again, even in Ireland, there's a lot of engineers that come out, especially civil engineers that come out of college, that do end up working for contractors in the pre-construction side. And I think again, it's just because of the aptitude and the ability to visualize things and measure things and put dollars or pounds or euros to them, So, so I think that was again just another. I was always one that always put my mindset to, I wanted to learn everything I could about all aspects of whatever business I was in. I mean, that's just always been my mindset. It's my mindset today. And, now it extends into different facets of a business, but it's the same thing. It's an inquisitive nature. And I think that's what kind of drives me to learn these things and become good at them.
Yeah, because from that position then with Howard S. Wright, going from that position into VP of National Mission Critical over at Balfour Beatty, a design build firm for data centers. A, how did that role come about? But B, I mean, looking from the outside in, that looks like a big jump. That looks like you were going from something you were very comfortable with into something in the pre-construction side and also the data center side, mission critical, design build.
Yeah.
It sounds as if you backed yourself big time there.
Yeah, I think, just to wrap up the Howard S. Wright journey, I think, I ended up as a project executive there. And the initial jump to Balfour Beatty, they'd bought Howard S. Wright at the time. And so I'd taken an abstinence out of Howard S. Wright and done some design build work with Clark Construction for a couple of years there, and with Steve Delorto, who's still a good friend of mine to this day. And again, there at Clark, I learned really about design build in the 2-year period I was there. and it stands to great stead to this day. And, so I think then, going to Balfour Beatty was really kind of going back to Howard S. Wright, and the opportunity just came up. I was starting at that point in time wanting to move east, get a little close to Ireland. My wife's family was on the East Coast. And so Howard S. Wright, unfortunately, didn't have anything. And Clark did have an office on the East Coast. But then, a friend of mine had mentioned that Balfour Beatty was looking for a project director in the Carolinas. And so I ended up talking with Tim Garrison here in the Carolinas, who was the VP at the time. And so he and I clicked. Again, I was just fortunate, got connected up. And again, he took me under his wing along with David Dooley here in the Carolinas and mentored me and saw something in me. And so I came in as a project director, which was really a lateral move from a project executive type thing. And then, the plan was to be Tim's successor when Tim retired. And that's basically what happened there. So
very good.
That's,
and how was the transition from what you had been building to data centers?
Well, I had done data centers at Howard S. Wright. So I had built some data centers for Intel in Northern California. And so at that time, the data center business was just really getting going. And so there wasn't that many people with a lot of experience in it. So I was just kind of fortunate. Then I ended up coming in, developing relationships with some, key clients, you'd recognize them all. And, again, that comes back to the relationship side, because when you get to a project executive level, big primary part of your job in a contractor is generating business for the company. It's not about, obviously you need the operational foundation, but it's not about writing RFIs anymore. It's about getting a strategy and developing a personal business within a business, if you will, to support the overall company's profitability is really a primary job. And so, I learned that again at Howard S. Wright and Spades. That was the way they operated. Was I good at it? It's debatable. When I started out, just like anything, you have to start somewhere. And so definitely got, the hang of it, and, ended up being successful, getting some nice jobs with Balfour Beatty in my time there.
Good. And talk to us about the softer side of transitioning from California to Charlotte. What did you see in Charlotte? What has Charlotte kind of given you over the last number of years?
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is at the time when we left, we had two babies basically. And I think the end of the day, at that point in time in California, with the recession, there was no work anywhere except San Francisco. And so obviously it was too expensive to move there with two young kids. We tried it, but it was just, too expensive. And then the grind of driving from Sacramento to the Bay Area just got, crazy. And so long story short, I think a mixture of just it's time to start looking somewhere else just for the sustainability of cost of living and bringing kids up is the primary thing. And then after living in California for so many years, moving to the Northeast would have been a tough ask, just weather-wise, putting it quite bluntly, So, here in the Southeast, the weather's a little more temperate, and, we didn't know much about Charlotte at the time, but I think when we did our research, it was all the pointers economically were it's going north. And, we liked that about it. And then when we came here and saw just what you can get for your money for a house, the quality of the schools, there's both good public and private schools here. It's great. And then, just gave us easier access to Ireland to get back to Ireland. And then it's closer to the rest of my wife's family here too. So I think all those things combined, we really thought it was a great place to bring the kids up. And for me, business-wise, it's been great, so from a work opportunity, life opportunity perspective, it's top notch,
Yeah, because we talked before on air. I mean, we do a lot of work in the Southeast and the South as well. And there's not obviously as many Irish people as New York or Boston or even Washington, but the numbers, they're going there in their droves. There seems to be a good Irish community down there at the moment.
There's a great Irish community here. And I mean, you've got some good Irish companies here, based in Charlotte as well, or just south of Charlotte. You've got, E&I Engineering down in South Carolina, great Donegal company again. You've got, there's just a bunch. The finance world, there's a ton of people here. So it's just, it's just a good, the St. Patrick's Day parade here is a big, even though we didn't have it this year due to COVID-19, but it's a big event in Charlotte every year, and you'd be
Yeah,
surprised how many people from all over Ireland are here now. You
yeah,
you go into town on a football Sunday or a rugby Saturday, and you're never going to be short of finding people to hang out with.
very good. A few GA jerseys running around.
There is. Yeah.
Very good. Well, listen. I mean that transition, Charlotte, a huge market for us at the moment. The Carolinas, it doesn't seem to be as affected by COVID as a lot of the other states. It seems to be ploughing on, whether it's in specific industries, manufacturing, healthcare, that you mentioned, the life sciences, pharma, technology industries over in Raleigh. It seems quite diverse to be able to kind of ride through this COVID-19 and come out stronger.
Yeah, I think so. And I think both governors of both states have done a good job. I think there's always going to be debate on what the right wrong thing to do is, but I think in general, that the case numbers are low. We want them to stay there. I think right now I'm involved with planning how to bring our company's teammates back to work and in a safe manner. So there's definitely has to be intentional, it has to be thoughtful, and you have to think about just the culture of what you want in each individual company going forward, because you want everyone to feel healthy, safe when they're at work. They want to, because that's a big piece of productivity. And so there's just it's a transformational time and another time of opportunity in our business, because you listen and read anything that's going on out there right now. There's just a lot of, it's just like with the virus itself. Now with the response to getting back to work, there's a lot of fiction out there and there's a lot of fact. And so separating the two is really, really important for companies, because otherwise you could just spend a boatload of money for not very much in return. So at the end of the day, you've got to keep your people as the most important thing and just build from there is really what's important. And a big part of my job right now is supporting our company and supporting our teammates and creating the environment for them to come back to work and continue their success.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. I'm interested, intrigued to find out a little bit about how your transition went from the general contractor side to now working with Sonic. Give us an idea what it's like on the client side compared to the GC side.
It's been tremendous. Again, I think from my personal sort of makeup, if you will, I think again it's just a natural evolution and tailor-made, similar to what Clark Pacific was when I started out. I think it's kind of the perfect fit for me, and it's again I'm a person that likes to be challenged continually, like to learn. I like to continually learn. And so now it's given me the opportunity to bring to bear my experiences of the last 20 years, apply them in a pure business perspective, right? Of really getting a strategy developed that supports an overall company mission outside of just individual projects, individual estimates, individual deliverables. Now you're bringing the entire thing together to be a solution for an enterprise, which I find very, very rewarding. And I've learned a tremendous amount about what it takes to really develop projects, because going the way I came, the one thing I never had was really what is the true client's perspective and need. And at the end of the day, if I had advice for anybody in the pre-construction world, is really understand operationally what a client needs and ensure you're reading between the lines and not just the lines on a drawing or a concept drawing that comes in from an architect. You really dig underneath the covers and understand the operations of your client and what is their needs, because that, I can personally tell you after the last 5 years, is a lost art in our business. And it's very hard to explain that to people till you actually live it. And I didn't even have it myself when I came here, to be honest with you, but it's something I've learned. And again, I've been fortunate, Jeff Dyke and Tim Keane and Raymond Valentine, my bosses, they all saw something in me, believed, and gave me a chance. And, David Smith, our CEO, and I've just been very, very, very fortunate. And, really now it really has helped to see how a business really operates. And it really is rewarding to be able to be a part of delivering on a business's vision. And because at the end of the day, that's what we're all here for, is to deliver shareholder value,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm interested to say, just from your take there and advice from pre-construction and estimators and GCs, do you find that your line of communication from you as the main contact within the client to not the CEO or the general manager or the VPs within general contractors, you think the more important discussion is the pre-construction and estimating team within a general contractor getting what you want and what's important to you, your communication with those guys?
Yeah, it is. It's critical. Yeah, it's the people that are actually doing the work is the critical piece. And I think, the thing that I see is a lot of the pre-construction departments are definitely very under-resourced. And a lot of times estimates are just kind of thrown out there based upon here's the last 5 jobs and roughly here's how much a square foot or whatever. But the reality is every city is different, every project's different, and really getting a little bit more specific in a estimate and a deliverable. And again, understanding the business operations, like in our case, where does car haulers come in and out of a site? Is what's on the drawing going to work? Is there issues? How are you going to secure your inventory? How are you going to secure your building? All these sort of things that are not necessarily quote unquote building items, but to the operational team, they're critical. If you're building a parking garage for a car dealer, how you set up the circulation and how how the business operations is going to actually operate cars and move cars is critical to success, because for us, every minute we spend moving a car is a minute and $1 that we're wasting, so
Yeah.
really understanding. And it's no different for data centers. It's, looking back now, if I had the experience I have now, when I was in the data center world, I'd have been a lot better at that, because again, you can recognize, forgetting about what's in front of you on the drawings. Okay, just recognize what and how, and understand and think about how the business is going to operate and how the people that come to work and have to maintain the building and operate the building day in, day out, what their needs are, is definitely a lost art in both design and pre-construction in the business right now. But it's also a great opportunity for young people. I keep every young person I talk to that wants to get in this business, I tell them there's never a more exciting or more opportunistic time to get into this business than right now.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you. The Pre-Construction Podcast is that it's been able to get out to the people that matter. So the guys that are into interns at the moment, the guys that are even in high school that are looking to go into college or they're in college, to get them as much information and content as possible. But it seems from what you're saying there now is what you touched on at the very beginning on your education in Galway is the broad covering of what you covered within that degree, but also being able to problem solve. If you have got an unbelievable estimator, pre-construction guy that comes to you on bid day and asks you those operational questions, then your interest automatically your interest peaks.
That's right.
So asking too many questions is never you can never ask enough questions.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I think the thing is within the pre-construction department, right? I think the thing is, it takes all shapes and sizes of people of different talents to actually bring complicated estimates together, because you do need to have someone that understands the construction operation side of things, but then you also need someone that understands the numbers and covering scope and all that tactical things that are important. So I'm not saying that you don't need those things, but I think that's the easier stuff because it's what people are comfortable with. And I think pushing yourself to there's a strange relationship between architects and pre-construction departments, in my estimation anyways, that people are afraid to ask an architect a question because they feel like if they ask a question in the pre-construction period, it could blow the job up on them. And I'm like,
yeah.
Then my answer to that is you might want to think about how you're asking the question, right? You don't need to make yourself look like the smartest guy in the block. You just need to go have a non, threatening discussion and just say, okay, look, help me understand this. What's important to the client? Because you may help the architect be successful and ultimately get them the job too if you help them think through these things. So I think that's, it's very interesting to watch the seat I'm in now. And I was probably in the same boat when I was there, to be clear. But I think it's very interesting to watch that, interaction that happens.
Yeah, but it's interesting to watch it. But the lines of communication are key. If the architect and the pre-construction just sitting there in their office, don't pick up the phone to one another, don't speak to one another, you're going to have major problems in the operation side of things.
That's 100% correct. And the thing is, it is important if you're doing design build versus the traditional models, right? Some of the things, Ireland is predominantly, more hard bid kind of bill of quantity type situation where, quantity surveyors primarily look at that. A big mistake I see people making that make the transition from that world and come over here, because there's quite a few, right, that have come over and I've had the opportunity to work with over the years, is get dollars in from contractors here, right? And there may not be contacts. They'll just tell you, hey, electrical is 2 million. And automatically people will start, oh, what's in that 2 million? And it just becomes this sort of fight. I think having the foresight to provide context, if you want numbers to come in from a contractor in a certain way, if you communicate that early to them, say, hey, this is how we need to see them. I know you have your methods of estimating, but for us, help us understand this is kind of how we need to see the numbers, and provide context to them is critical too for communication. Because when you're dealing particularly in a concept world, it is a different world of estimating and method of estimating and thought process. And but some people still can't help themselves. They're thinking they're in a bid situation, right? So I don't want the number to get too high. So I think being able to contextualize your numbers is critical. I remember dealing with a big data center client in the QS from Scotland a few number of years back, and he was saying, "Oh, your steel's too high," and I just calmly asked him, "Why are you thinking it's too high?" Well, because on the last data center we only spent X dollars. And I'm like, well, how big was your last data center? He'd say this. So I was like, well, we got double the size data center here. So let's put some context around the numbers, and whichever, we can go by ton or we can go by square foot, however you want. And let's just compare it that way. And when we compare it that way, we ended up being on a per unit basis cheaper than what he bought the last job for. So I think the caution there is making sure you're contextualizing. If you're going to use benchmarks, contextualize them as you're generating estimates, so that way you understand it's more than just dollars per square foot. Try and put, is it per ton, per cubic yard, for something else? Have a secondary metric that can help you quickly explain what's behind your number. Because then most clients that are reasonable will say, okay, well, we don't need that many pounds per square foot steel in our structures. We only need this. So that, it lead to a conversation. And that's ultimately what you want to be able to do, in my mind, to be successful in the pre-construction world. And that's what Bill Jensen, the gentleman I mentioned from Howard S. Wright in Oregon, that's the one thing he taught me years ago, and it's stuck with me ever since, is just understanding, to the level you need to what's in the number, but being able to explain it is the other part, being able to communicate around it. Because just throwing a dollar number across the fence isn't going to get you there.
But what you did very cleverly there in that situation was conflict resolution. That could have turned into quite a hairy conversation, but you quickly diffused the conversation by asking a question back and being able to ask and have him almost go into more detail on why he thought that, and then you were quickly able to find out that the answer. Very good.
Because you have to. Well, you have to remember, I've even seen it myself. I've been this way myself in my current role. You're busy with a lot of business things going on, and so the hour that you get to sit down with someone that's coming in with pre-construction to present an estimate to you, you've got a million other things you've just been doing. You're under a lot of pressure. You've got a deadline that you got to get to finance or whatever. The poor pre-con guy has spent 2 or 3 weeks putting this estimate together, and so you have to think about it as you're coming in to sit with the client. Just understand that client is probably only giving you this hour. He probably hasn't thought about this job before he's sitting down with you, and he won't be thinking about it again after you leave. And he certainly won't be thinking about it again if you're not able to explain the value that's in your proposition that you're giving him. But if you show him that you've thought about what's important to him, that will pique the interest, I guarantee you, and to any client. Because I talk to a lot of peers of mine, and it's a very similar story that you hear.
Yeah.
Regardless of industry.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, because at the moment we've got COVID, but I am still, clients are still hiring in North Carolina, South Carolina, and generally
Yeah.
the Southeast, but they're still hiring for the same people that they were looking for prior to COVID, because the best people are still working. And to be honest with you, during a pandemic like this, they're a little bit less inclined to move. So it's getting even harder to get the best people.
It is, and I think some of that, Gareth, is a hangover from the last recession, and it does scare me a little bit what's going to happen here. Because if you look at, and it's the same thing happened even in Ireland, there was 2 or 3 years there. Hardly any civil engineers were getting turned out, and hardly any QSs, because there was no work in the industry, and people weren't thinking about that. By the time you get out of college in 4 years, it'll be back. But that happened all over the world. It happened here in the U.S. And so we've never recovered. So there's a gap of people from, say, my sort of experience level to the 10-year person. There's some new people coming in, but there's a gap. But some of the young people that have come into the business, I mean, I've got someone working for me right now. They are the brightest and best and hard workers that I've ever been around. And I've got nothing but good things to say about the Gen Zers, the millennials. I think there's a lot of hysteria and noise out there about their abilities and their willingness to work. Well, I find that everyone I've been around, I find the opposite. They're the brightest, best. They're energetic. They want to be part of something good. They want to deliver. They want to please. I think there's definitely talent out there, but it just doesn't have the experience yet. That's the piece that's missing. And I think there's going to be 10 more hard years yet, as more and more of the baby boomers leave, of really getting the right experienced people in. And then what's the problem you're going to have is who's going to train them as they're coming in. And you look across the country, who's there to train these young people to get these skills that we just talked about,
But Martin, see the knowledge retention, it is key over the next 5 to 10 years. The amount of estimating departments that I've spoken in, and they're saying, we've got 6 people in the estimating department. We've got 5 over the age of 50, and we've got one guy here who's an intern. I said, well, what are you going to do in 10 years whenever all of that knowledge walks out the door and retires? It's to me, we can't fix the generational gap, but we can fix the knowledge that's walking out of the industry in the next 5 or 10 years. So it's about, and if you bring it back even to get that 3 or 4 years experience, you got to stop looking for the guy that's got 3 or 4 years estimating experience and look for the really bright project managers, APMs, superintendents that really want to get into pre-construction and estimating because they're the ideal candidate for me.
Yeah, and I think, there's been a big focus over the last number of years on we got to get superintendents, and there's been a great focus. And I've met a lot of young men and women that have become great superintendents with college degrees, right? Because that was the talk 5-6 years ago. Oh, the tradesmen are all dying. Well, there's been great success. A lot of companies now have got good young superintendents / construction managers on sites now, both men and women, which is fantastic. And I think the reason that happened is because of companies put a focus on it. And I think pre-construction, in my experience, has always been the poor relation, at least here in the U.S., of contracting companies. When a recession comes, it's the first place they go to cut head count. It's just mind-baffling. And to me, it's really mind-blowing because it's the lifeblood of your business. It's like they're the guys on the front line winning work for you and helping you win work. So it's very interesting. So I just think if a focus gets put there and does what you say and trains these young people and finds ones that have a passion towards this and show them there's a path, because most people want to understand, is there a path for me to move up a company? That's what most young people with energy want. And if you can show them that path, similar to what has happened in the field, I think that's what would get someone to jump. But a young project engineer isn't going to go to the pre-con department if he thinks there's no future for me there in the company. So
but the whole stigma around construction in high schools and even high schools, especially because before they select their degree, they're thinking muds, bricks, dirt in construction, but really VDC, BIM, pre-construction, construction's getting sexy again, but we've got to sell it that way, and we've got to sell them careers. And just one other thing you mentioned there about the education. Am I a bit naive to think that either a large, really large, wealthy construction company should be opening up a quantity surveying type degree rather than the civil, electrical, mechanical, and we still need these, but there has to be a pre-construction estimating quantity surveying degree available for people that purely want to get into that space.
Yeah, I think so. I think, I think there's some folks out there in New York actually doing just that right now. But I think, I think even the quantity surveying degree needs a little more refinement to it to really resonate over here, in the US, as far as I think the interpersonal side of it, and how to interact is critical with contractors, not put them on the defensive right away. Because in Ireland, at least what I remember, was there was a pretty, good friction between quantity surveyors and, subcontractors and stuff. So I think that relationship here in the US is definitely markedly different. Contractors rely solely on subcontractors to win work, and so they want positive relationships here. So I think that side of it is good, but I think the metrics side of it that you're talking about is definitely important. But I think, again, contextualizing the overall low-level tactical numbers into the bigger picture is critical. The ability to do that is critical. And then the other part of, just to follow on what you said, though, I think the today's advances in technology, BIM, VDC, all that is definitely a piece of, I think what the future could hold. But I think the other part really is machine learning, and there's a friend of mine right now out there, looking at developing a software that really leverages machine learning to help predict what numbers need to be and should be based upon labor rates and materials and all that kind of stuff. So there's.
Yeah, Martin, I mean, that's one thing that I speak to a lot of people about within VDC BIM is machine learning. And talk to me in your experience about, I think you called it the three-legged stool, the architect, the general contractor, and the designer. Give us an understanding of how that dynamic works and how we can improve it.
Yeah, I think, at the end of the day, some of it, so you got the owner, the architect / designers, and your contractors. And I think at the end of the day, sometimes it feels like there's competing interests between the designers and the contractors, and when it should really all be one, all for one and one for all, to really deliver a budget solution and an operational solution that would meet what the client is looking for, right? And so, and not to be afraid to have, and that doesn't mean it has to be all nice. I mean, there's definitely times that you might have to have hard conversations of, hey, this budget isn't realistic for what you're asking, but it's all how you have that conversation, right? Is the trick in having it early enough. But to me, it goes into having the right talent in your pre-construction department from a contractor that can actually communicate well and anticipate. I mean, you can look at a set of plans that comes into you and say, that plan right there, that structural, like Bill Jensen, go back to him again. He was an expert. When he'd see a set of plans and he'd see the structure set up on a preliminary set of plans, he would be able to tell right away that geometry of that building is more expensive. If we just make the building 5 feet this way and 4 feet this way, that will bring the costs down, because all of a sudden you got less exterior skin on the building, got all these knock-on effects. So that anticipation and overlaying it with the machine learning is really what it's at. So you're never going to get rid of the human element, the human intelligence side of this either, in my mind, because the human has to be able to, recognize these things and be able to communicate them. And so I think communication improvement is the single, it might be an old cliche, but it still holds true, is critical to improving that. And then really educating the architects, because then too often what happens is the designers will run off drawing a program, and it ultimately comes back to not understanding the operational program, because you'll have a building that's 10,000 square feet too big. You're going to have, then that's going to put the cost up, and everyone's going to be all mad because the cost has gone up. But at the end of the day, nobody said, okay, let's break this back down to the program. Is this the program that we need? Is every square foot being utilized as efficiently as it can? And get to that basic kind of level of discussion before you run off wasting a bunch of money drawing. So to me, again, it goes back into not to be rigid with process, but to at least set up a good communication process at the start of the job and have everybody agree this is the square footage. We're not going to go over a square foot over this because we know we can't afford that, right? Whatever the parameters are. And I think that's the key, is having foresight, anticipation skills, and communication skills early, so that everyone fully understands the program, understands the mission and what they're trying to accomplish before you just start trying to solve a problem. Because our business is full of problem solvers. But sometimes that's a detriment because you start drawing before you really know what outcome you need to have. So I think having a line of sight on your desired outcome is critical for all three.
And just to kind of touch on that slightly, Martin, is that why people are going towards the design build and the negotiated part of work? Because the negotiated part gets everybody, all parties involved at the very, very beginning. And even design build does that as well, especially these companies. And I can name 2 or 3, the likes of the Beck Group, Haskell, these guys that have their architects in-house, their designers in-house, and their GCs in-house. For a client, is there something nice and what's the word? You just have more confidence that everything and everyone's working in the one harmony, if you like.
Yeah, I think, I've seen that. I think it's hard to see for complex jobs the all in-house firms working, because I've worked with a couple of them. And I think there's a limit to that ability and to their level of creativity, because most clients still do need the creative ability that architects bring. And the trick is getting everyone in the right seat on the bus and leveraging their strengths, and not trying to focus and have them do something they're not good at. But I think having the education, regardless of whether it's an all in-house company or you're having separate companies, I think communication is key. Even if you go to a bid, we had a bid job that we just did recently, but once the bid was over, we put the mindset of everybody working together as the rule, so to speak, and that that had no effect, no adverse effect just because it was a bid. It's all in the leadership and all in how you approach and how you set your job up for communication and a teamwork environment. In my mind, I think some of the stuff, I think, I used to be on the board of the DBIA, so I know all the values of design build. It has its place in certain deals. But again, there's a lot to it. There's a lot of risk factors. There's a lot of, it gets into a lot of business side of things before you make that decision. It's not necessarily just about communication around the three-legged stool. To me, that's more of a behavioral thing that should happen regardless of delivery model.
Okay, good. Well, listen, Martin, it's safe to say that me and you can chat here all day.
Yeah, that's right.
But we do have, I'm sure you've got a lot more on your plate.
I do. I have a few things to do.
I want to say thank you very much. It's been a real insight. We might be able to catch up with you this time, 12 months, to see how you're getting on and see how this market has come out of this COVID-19 pandemic.
100%. Anytime. I'd love to. Thanks for having me again. Really enjoyed it as well.
No problem. Thanks, Martin. Speak to you soon.
All right. See ya. Bye.